Alright troops, I hope you like inane garbage because that's going to be the V playbook from here on out. Everything that sucks teaming up to make us all as miserable as possible. Terrible to play and even worse to watch. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of. So this is the transcendent V metagame that is unavoidable if you want to actually S-rank every section on this mission. Dancing in this corner like an asshole, using the camera to abuse the fact enemies can't attack you if you can't see them, and throwing out Hedgehog to push out any enemies that have the audacity to wander on screen. This is a requirement, they did not test this character even a tiny bit. The first fight is the hardest and most pivotal in the mission, and where 90% of resets are going to happen. Getting the dance off is tough on its own, but the riots can be tricky to dodge in this tiny area, and on top of that all your summons are spewing visual noise everywhere, making it hard to identify what's going on. Nightmare has two possible spawn points, and one of them is way down the end of the tunnel where nothing's going on, so he might take like 20 seconds to actually show up to the fight depending on what attacks he chooses to use. So if he does go down there, you should try and head his direction and drag the enemies into him to get him in play a bit faster. In an ideal world, you'll score the KO on all three of the first wave of riots at the same time, and you can unsummon Nightmare and use finishers to build some meter back before fighting the last guy. It's really important you kill all of the first three before hitting him. You need his devil trigger to activate so you can hit him a bunch more and gain more style. Don't worry about burning all your devil trigger gauge for this fight. Dancing at the start of the next one builds it back up. This fight isn't graded in the results screen, but you can leech more points out of it to work up a buffer for the next one, which is much harder to score on. I wanted to walk out of here with at least 6100 points, which isn't too much of a challenge, and it's definitely possible to get a lot higher if things go well. First things first is nuke that barrel before anything spawns. The damage it does will cut your scoring potential massively, since everything it hits will die so much more quickly. The high ground is the best place to dance, since the enemies need to jump up there first, giving you a lot of time to react to what they're doing. You want to stay as close to the middle on here as possible, because the actual biggest threat isn't the enemies, it's Shadow, who is going to try and push you off for no reason. You can see him trying his best, and I had to let Hedgehog go to stop him from knocking me off and interrupting me. After you're done doing a jig, the actual fight can begin. The first group is easy enough and where you're going to build the majority of your style. So call Nightmare in early so he can get to work keeping you at SSS as soon as possible. Again, trying to spread damage around and finish everything off at once so you can unsummon him and build meter back up is ideal, but not always possible. The Judeka is a pain to deal with, but having some devil trigger meter so you don't have to worry about Shadow getting stalemated can make a big difference. Nightmare can't reliably score hits since it's going to be teleporting all over the place, so just keeping Shadow alive is its main purpose. I made an absolute mess of timing here, and the video of this part is largely a what not to do, but the strategy is to hit with skewers as much as possible. Inputting it immediately after he spawns in from a teleport, or you see him commit to an attack, has a surprisingly high success rate, and will end things way faster. Although doing it when Nightmare isn't up is liable to just get Shadow obliterated. Again, don't worry about blowing all your meter because there's a white orb pickup before the next battle, and don't worry about blowing your point buffer either. Make it out of here with over 6,000 and it should be smooth sailing since it's easy to gain points in the next two fights, and we don't even have to do any more fucking dancing. Even with a fight that ends as poorly as this, getting the dance off before killing the first wave means you can still hold on to your style score. I only dropped 50 points between the last fight and this one, and this is about as bad as things can possibly go, so there is certainly some room for error. This fight and everyone after, except the boss, is graded so you do need to come out of it with 6,001 points minimum. And yeah, I found out the hard way that having exactly 6,000 points isn't enough for an S rank. With the Judeka fight dealt with, the hardest part of the mission is now over and it's all about not screwing up. No more camera shenanigans, no doing jigs in the corner. The remaining combat is simple, honest V gameplay. Impusa queens are total damage sponges, which is good for us since it means simply hitting it gets us enough style. Priority is to kill the little guys quickly to boost your style rank and activate the queen's devil trigger so you can really wail away at it and rack up the points. V is particularly good at dealing with her since you never need to commit to anything. Dante and Nero's biggest issue with her is her armour that lets her interrupt your attacks if you're not careful, but that doesn't apply to V at all since you can just run around at a safe distance while familiars do the work. They can get stalemated pretty easily, but it's not like you need the devil trigger for anything else urgently, so you can just have it running comfortably in the background for this entire fight. The main threat is her jump attack, which is pretty quick, but if you keep your eye focused on her and not your familiars, you should be able to see it coming from a mile off. When Nightmare is down, the troops are quite vulnerable, but slowing down and losing some style by the time your devil trigger meter is depleted shouldn't make much of a difference. You should have scored enough by then that you can screw up for a minute without much issue. Again, we got to get that barrel out of here, those things will kill you. It's all about focusing on style for the first wave and getting the meter pumped before you have to be slightly more defensive in the second half of the fight. You should be pretty comfortable dealing with Kena and Antinora by now, since they're the default V fight filler, so you can put all your mental energy towards tracking your moves and making sure you're not repeating anything and maxing out on style. When it comes time to finishing everything in this wave off, unsummon Nightmare if you haven't run out of meter already. Gaining some for the second wave is going to come in very handy since nobodies are pretty good at killing your familiars, and they can take a beating, so uptime for Shadow and Griffin is very important. Focusing them down one at a time is the safest strategy, although personally I'd still prioritise style gain over it where applicable. Time is always of the essence however, since if you take too long to kill them, they'll start spawning new ones, and it's really easy to get bogged down forever fighting them with an ever escalating chance of getting hit. Hanging out at medium range from them is safe for the most part since you can see everything coming from a mile off, with the exception being their grab attack when they're in big red hand mode. It's pretty fast and the main thing you need to be on the lookout for, but outside of this one thing, they mostly just operate as big punching bags provided you keep your distance properly. They have tons of HP, so slow, consistent play is key here, as is focusing on your meter management so you're never left with dead familiars. On that note, the more meter you close out the fight with, the easier of a time you're going to have on the boss, but if it's going to make this fight even a tiny bit easier, summon Nightmare whenever you need it. I didn't have to here, but I would have called him in a second if Shadow or Griffin got KO'd. Geryon is an endurance test more than anything. Scoring hits on him is awkward and you only have a couple of attacks that can deal more than chip damage. Likewise, most of his kit is extremely easy to avoid. The most important part of this fight by far is going to be meter management. Nightmare very rarely gets opportunities to score hits on his own, but the call attack when he enters the fight is one of your best sources of damage. However, to dodge a lot of his attacks you really need to either be able to invuln your way through it with the Nightmare Call animation, or sidestep it with Shadow, and if you don't have access to either of those it can get pretty risky. Doing everything you can to keep 3 bars available at all times so you can hit the Nightmare Panic button is the single most important aspect of the fight, by far. For me, the hardest attack to deal with was when he charges you down with his sword. Standard jump invulnerability frames can be a little awkward to time, but doing a left dodge with Shadow makes it extremely easy. Geryon is right-handed, so dodging away from his sword here is important. Timing is the key to your attacks here. Nightmare Call and Skewer are your 2 big damage dealers, but they both have big wind up, so learning when to use them so he hasn't run off by the time they land will save you a lot of energy. It's mostly pretty simple. Anytime he comes to a stop he'll stay there for a little bit, but in the case of Skewer you have to input it before he's actually there. So there's a bit of nuance to understanding his animations and how he moves, and it's something that can only be learned by observing him. My strategy was to try and keep my Nightmare Calls to an absolute minimum, unless he'd taken Shadow out of the game, or he was attacking me while in his slow effect. Although Nightmare isn't going to be scoring many hits, letting him hang out for a bit after you call him will make Geryon focus his attacks on him, so you can use it to catch a breather and score some more hits with familiars. His AoE lightning attacks will knock Shadow out very easily unless you're very careful with repositioning him or Nightmare is summoned. In which case, it turns around into a great opportunity to just spam skewers at him, since these attacks have long wind up and long recovery, giving you a big opportunity to punish them. When he throws out the double slow and your movement is actually affected by it, Nightmare Call needs to be on hand or you're going to get walloped. Jump and side dodge invulnerability frames are just not enough to deal with everything he can do, even though they're extended. But the monstrous amount on summoning Nightmare will get you through like 4 attacks in succession before you need to do anything. It gets that big when slowed down. In the last part of the fight when Devil Trigger is active, he still has nothing new to bring to the table. He just takes reduced damage, so continue playing your slow, steady game, and patience and endurance will win out every time. And that's Geryon. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you next mission.